was most fascinated as I listened to Mr. Ralph Nevinson tell his story to me. Patwar, a man he had known, had told him 2 years earlier about a manuscript. There was some superstition attached to it, Patwar had said. It was supposed to bring good fortune to the one who possessed it, provided it was kept shut away in safety from daylight and fire. It must never be handled at any time. What would happen if it were handled, Patwar didn't seem to know. Mr. Ralph Nevinson was telling me this story on board the steamer that was taking us up the Berbice River to Hood de Vries. He had invited me to go up there with his family and paint some pictures to adorn the walls of the newly renovated office of the Berbice Timber and Balata Company, he said. But it was dawning on me that what his daughter Jessie had told me earlier could possibly be true. That Mr. Nevinson, who always went to Hood de Vries alone, wanted company this time for some special reason. He was acting strangely, she claimed, and so she was as well, I thought, for they too, Mr. Nevinson and Jessie, claimed to have heard a flute being played on the steamer, a flute which I did not hear, nor did anybody else for that matter. As Mr. Nevinson spoke, a mystery was unfolding, a story I've come to title My Bones and My Flute. Mr. Nevinson continued to tell me his story. He said, "To my surprise, when I arrived at Hood de Vries 3 weeks ago, the first thing Rayburn the caretaker told me was that Patwar had died of an attack of jaundice the week before, and that before dying he had asked that this, his good luck canister, as he called it, be given to me. He had no relatives, he wasn't married, and the buck-woman he lived with was only a paramour. So there was evidently no fuss about the canister. Rayburn collected it the day after his death and brought it to my cottage at Hood de Vries. I found it on the dressing table in my bedroom. It's a small thing, 10 inches by 7 and 3 inches deep, made of tin and rather rusty-looking. Well, Milton, you know yourself I'm the last person on earth who thinks twice about superstitions, and without hesitation I opened the canister. There was no lock on it. It was simply shut tight, and I just had to prise up the lid." He paused here and opened the dictionary at the place where he had inserted the manuscript. From where I sat, I saw what looked like 2 sheets of strong parchment folded over once. The writing on it was reddish-brown, evidently from age. Mr. Nevinson continued, "This is what I found. There was nothing else in it but this. And just as you yourself might have done, I lifted it out and glanced through it. I could only translate it roughly, because I hadn't thought of bringing my dictionary, and my knowledge of Dutch is moderate. I should have mentioned that I found the house in a rather untidy condition when I arrived. Rayburn was down with some sort of diarrhea, and he said he hadn't been able to do much cleaning up. He's a hard-working and trustworthy fellow, and I excused him. But if there's anything I can't tolerate, it's an untidy house. So the following morning I took the return steamer and went back to town. Of course, between us, I could have remained and roughed things. But the truth is that I was itching to translate this thing properly. I simply couldn't remain a whole fortnight up there without my dictionary. Before I go on, I think the best thing would be to read you a translation of the first part of it. It's divided into 2 parts. He produced from between the leaves of the dictionary a slip of paper which I saw bore his own handwriting. And then he said, "I'm afraid the fellow was certainly demented when he wrote it. But we'll discuss that aspect of the matter later on. It reads like this: He who touches this parchment seals himself in pact with me Jan Peter Furman, to listen to my music, and later, when I beckon, to join me in death. They have robbed me and massacred my wife and children, who should have departed for St. Eustatius and the Standfastigkeit. I shall never rest till the day that my bones and my flute are found interred with Christian rites. I place a curse and plague upon the person or persons who may touch this parchment. My roaming presence shall pester him or them unto death, unless my wishes are carried out. Gnashing my teeth on this 4th day of March, I shall end my life on earth. I curse these black wretches even as I curse the blacker ones. To him who seeks release from this pact and would put my soul at peace, let him heed what now follows, and so be led to the discovery of my bones and my flute and my musket. Mr. Nevinson glanced up at this stage. Then he continued, "All this is on the first page, and about 2/3 of the second." He wrote on both sides of the paper. The rest of the space is taken up with a long account of how to recover the writer's bones and so forth. It's fairly intelligible, but the only difficulty is that he seems to take it for granted that the finder of this document would know the whereabouts of his plantation. He evidently didn't foresee that the plantations up this river would eventually be abandoned and the jungle allowed to take charge again. It was only Mr. Nevinson's eyes that made me realize that he was inwardly perturbed. He folded up the manuscript again and placed it between the leaves of the dictionary, then clasped his hands lightly and looked across the table at me. "That's one part of the story," he said. "I come now to the part that is going to sound like something out of Edgar Allan Poe, or that other writer, M.R. James. Anyway, it's happened, and I can assure you that no one could wish more earnestly than myself that it could prove mere fiction. You've noted what the writer said in this document? Well, as you can understand, Milton, I never gave a thought to the threat contained in the thing. I was only interested in it as an antiquary. It's obvious that this fellow was some planter who was persecuted during the slave insurrection of 1763. The black wretches he refers to can only have been rebel slaves who must have pillaged his plantation and murdered his family. All that seems plain, especially as he speaks of committing suicide on this 4th day of March, as he put it. The insurrection, as you know, started on the Canyon Creek on the 21st of February, but the rebels didn't reach this river until the 27th, and everyone was taken by surprise. On the 4th of March, the situation was chaotic. The predicant's house at Peerboom was under siege, and the planters were in flight or skulking in the bush in hiding. Well, that was my only interest in the thing. But you can imagine my consternation when one evening in my study it suddenly occurred to me that I was listening to a flute in the neighborhood. I don't want to exaggerate or paint a melodramatic picture. You know me better than that. And as a matter of fact, I may tell you that simply hearing this flute didn't cause me much alarm. There are all sorts of musical instruments in that town, as you know yourself. If somebody isn't plaguing the air with a saxophone, it's a piano or a squeaky violin. But naturally, hearing a flute, I remembered the manuscript and began to think back idly. It was absurd, of course, to attach any significance to a flute in the neighborhood, simply because I happened to have read this, as I thought, idle threat in the manuscript. But I'm human, and I couldn't help letting my thoughts dwell on the thing. Then it struck me that previous to this I'd been hearing this flute for 2 or 3 days past. This wasn't the first time. I felt distinctly uncomfortable now, and began to do some serious thinking, trying to remember exactly where and when I had heard the flute. And in a flash I recalled that in the early hours of the Thursday morning at Hood de Vries I had heard it too. I had awakened to the sound of it. It seemed to come from some way downstream, and I never gave a thought to it because the men have their lodges just beyond the sawmill, and it might have been one of them amusing himself. They're early risers. But thinking back on it, there in my study, I began to wonder other things. I began to connect it with this warning in the manuscript, and it was this that caused me consternation. I traced back carefully, and began to realize that it was from that Thursday morning I had begun to hear this flute, and what was more, that every day since then I had heard it. Mr. Nevinson paused, and I regarded him in silence as he rubbed his hand slowly down his cheek. His forehead was perspiring slightly. He continued, "It's difficult to conceive of anything like this happening, Milton. I mean, in the midst of our cold, everyday existence, with traffic in the streets and typewriters tapping in an office and everything going on in the old, usual, reasoned, commonplace way. And happening to me, of all people, a staid, unromantic old horse like me. It seems absurd, grotesque, and yet there it is. It happens once or twice a day. Once at the office, when I wasn't thinking of it, I heard it. No definite melody. A sort of trail of notes, as if someone were practicing a Debussy scale, but weren't quite getting it right." He drummed with his fingers musingly on the table. "I didn't say anything to Nell or Jessie, of course, because the last thing I wanted was to alarm them, and I kept hoping that it was some peculiar phenomenon that would cease eventually. But on the contrary, it has got worse and worse. It's getting closer. I mean it. Closer and closer." Yesterday at noon, when I was on my way home from the office, I heard it, and it seemed to come from the footboard of my car. Yet there was no one there. I stopped the car and made a thorough search within the car itself and around it, and there can be no question of ventriloquy. I've tested that possibility in a dozen different ways. Why, look at today. It sounded right at my elbow when I was sitting there with the others, chatting. I was so startled I had to rise and pace up and down the deck, but it followed me. Everywhere I moved, it followed me. Really, it's incredible. It's like living a part in a tale you've read in some book. I can't describe the sensation, Milton. This is the very last thing I'd ever dreamt possible." He shifted in his chair. "And you can imagine the shock I got when Jessie called to me and asked me if I was hearing it. You can't conceive the effort it took me to control myself, because I knew in a flash she must have been fishing about in my desk drawers. I'd put the manuscript in the left-hand drawer because I always lock that drawer. But I've been taking the manuscript out to glance through it so often, I must have omitted to lock the drawer on one or two occasions." He dabbed at his forehead, then continued, "It's like some unpleasant dream. I still can't believe it's happening. Ha ha ha! If this gets around, people won't hesitate to pronounce me out of my mind. And I couldn't blame them." After another silence, he smiled at me in that quiet, grave manner of his, which goes a long way to contribute to the confidence he inspires in the people who know him. Then he spoke again. "I'm afraid I wasn't very honest with you, youngster. The firm does want you to do those pictures. The commission still holds good. But it was really I who maneuvered it so that you could come up here with us. I need someone like you to help me find a way out of this situation, Milton." Mr. Nevinson continued with what was really an appeal. You're the only fellow I could think of who would be interested in this affair in a really serious and sensible spirit. Despite your reputation for being an eccentric, I happen to know you as you really are. The opinions I hear expressed about you don't affect me one bit. I know I can depend on you. Nell and Jessie I've brought along to provide us both with company. In many respects, I'm far more chicken-hearted than you may imagine. Somehow I couldn't stand the thought of going up there without company while this mysterious ghost play was happening all around me. Mr. Nevinson stopped talking for the time being. I was more curious than ever. Perhaps you already know that I didn't run away from it all. I stayed. That's why there's more to tell of my bones and my flute.